Human history is not a story of kindness, it is not a story of fairness. It is a graveyard of the weak and a throne room for the few who understood power. Empires were never built by men chasing approval, and kingdoms were never forged by men begging for acceptance. The world remembers conquerors, rulers, and architects of destiny for one reason: they understood the brutal mechanics of human nature. Machiavelli studied this with ruthless clarity. He observed kings, tyrants, generals, and political masterminds. And what he discovered was something most people are too uncomfortable to admit. Power does not respect desperation. The desperate are manipulated. The desperate are used. And when they are no longer useful, they are quietly discarded. Look through the cold pages of history, and you will see the same pattern repeated again and again. Men chased glory and died forgotten on battlefields. Men chased love and were destroyed by betrayal. Men chased recognition and ended up serving the very people they hoped would acknowledge them. The world has always rewarded the opposite type of man: the rare one, the silent one, the man who refuses to run after anything. Because the moment a man stops chasing, something strange begins to happen around him. People feel the shift immediately, even if they cannot explain it. His silence becomes heavy. His patience becomes intimidating. His emotional control becomes unsettling. Suddenly, the same people who ignored him begin watching him. The same opportunities he once chased begin appearing on their own. Respect, attention, influence, things most people beg for, start moving toward him naturally. This is one of the coldest psychological laws that governs human behavior. Desire loses value when it is easily given away. The man who chases reveals his hunger, and hunger makes him predictable. But the man who withdraws his need for validation becomes unpredictable, and unpredictability creates gravity. People begin asking themselves questions they cannot answer. Why does he not react? Why does he not try to impress anyone? Why does he seem untouched by approval or rejection? Curiosity slowly replaces indifference. Curiosity turns into attention. Attention evolves into respect. And respect becomes influence. Throughout history, the men who commanded loyalty and fear were never the ones begging for recognition. They were the ones who seemed completely unaffected by it. But understand something important before we go deeper. The moment you stop chasing, you will feel something most people cannot tolerate: silence. No applause, no validation, no immediate reward. The world has trained you since childhood to run after approval, to compete for attention, and to measure your value by how others respond to you. Breaking that conditioning feels uncomfortable at first. Many men retreat the moment they experience that quiet. They rush back to seeking validation because silence makes them feel invisible. But the dangerous man understands that silence is not emptiness. Silence is power building in the background. Silence is the moment where identity transforms. Machiavelli hinted at this reality in a different way when he wrote that a ruler should avoid dependence on the love of others. Love can vanish overnight. Approval can disappear with a single mistake. But a man who does not rely on either becomes extremely difficult to manipulate. When people realize they cannot control your behavior with praise or criticism, their attitude changes immediately. Suddenly they want your attention. Suddenly they want your approval. Suddenly they begin chasing the very presence you once offered freely. This is the paradox that governs influence in every era of human history. The more you chase something, the more it escapes you. The moment you detach from it, it begins moving toward you. But reaching that state requires something brutal: emotional discipline, silence, and control. It requires the strength to walk away even when every instinct tells you to chase. And once you master that shift, your presence alone begins to change the behavior of everyone around you. Before we continue deeper, write, "I do not chase, I attract," in the comments. Let those words settle in your mind. Because the moment a man truly understands that sentence, he stops living like everyone else. And that is when the transformation into an untouchable man truly begins. Number 1. The first rule of invisible kings. There is a truth buried beneath centuries of blood, betrayal, and fallen empires. A truth so cold that most men instinctively look away from it. The world does not belong to the loudest men. It does not belong to the kindest men. And it certainly does not belong to the men who chase approval like starving animals searching for crumbs. The world belongs to the men who master absence. Throughout history, the most dangerous figures were rarely the ones shouting their ambitions. They were the ones who stood quietly in the shadows, while others exhausted themselves seeking validation. Machiavelli understood this with terrifying clarity. A ruler who shows his hunger for loyalty invites manipulation. A man who reveals his desperation for respect loses it immediately. But a man who withholds his need becomes something else entirely, unpredictable, unreadable, and therefore powerful. Human psychology has a dark instinct embedded deep inside it. People do not value what is freely available. They value what seems distant, controlled, and difficult to reach. This is why kings lived behind guarded walls. This is why emperors spoke rarely. This is why the most feared men in history did not waste their time explaining themselves to crowds. Distance creates gravity. Silence creates authority. The moment a man begins chasing attention, he unknowingly strips himself of both. Every attempt to prove himself signals weakness to the subconscious mind of others. Every explanation sounds like a request for approval. Every display of need reduces his value in the invisible hierarchy that governs human interaction. Most men never realize they are trapped in this invisible system. They spend their lives performing, convincing, explaining, proving. They speak too much, reveal too much, react too quickly. They believe effort alone creates influence. But effort without restraint only exposes desperation. Machiavelli warned rulers about this exact mistake. A prince who tries too hard to be loved becomes dependent on those who grant that love. And dependence is the beginning of control. The man who needs admiration becomes a prisoner of public opinion. The man who needs acceptance becomes predictable. Predictable men are easy to control, easy to manipulate, and easy to discard once their usefulness fades. But there exists another type of man, far rarer and far more unsettling to the world around him. This man understands the power of withdrawal. He understands that attention is a currency, and he refuses to spend it cheaply. He does not chase conversations. He does not rush to prove his worth. He does not react emotionally to every provocation thrown in his direction. Instead, he observes. He listens. He studies the behavior of others, the way a strategist studies a battlefield. And while everyone else competes for attention, he quietly becomes the center of it without asking. This is where the psychological shift begins to disturb people. When a man refuses to chase, others begin chasing him. Not because he asked them to, but because his restraint creates a vacuum that human curiosity cannot ignore. People begin wondering what drives him. They search for signals in his silence. They test his reactions, hoping to provoke something they can understand. But the man who has mastered emotional control offers them nothing. His calmness becomes unsettling. His detachment becomes mysterious. And slowly, their curiosity turns into a strange form of respect. History has always rewarded this type of man. The quiet strategist who lets others reveal themselves first. The leader who speaks only when necessary. The individual who appears immune to praise, criticism, approval, or rejection. These men develop an aura that others cannot easily explain. It is not loud dominance. It is not aggressive authority. It is something colder, something heavier. It is the presence of someone who cannot be easily influenced or manipulated. And in a world built on emotional reactions and constant noise, that kind of presence feels almost supernatural. But reaching this state requires a brutal sacrifice. You must let go of the need to be understood. You must abandon the instinct to defend yourself against every accusation. You must accept that many people will misinterpret your silence as arrogance, your calmness as indifference, and your distance as hostility. Most men cannot tolerate that misunderstanding. They rush to clarify themselves, to repair their image, to win back approval. And the moment they do, they return to the same trap that keeps millions of men powerless. The man who refuses that trap becomes something else entirely. He becomes difficult to read, difficult to provoke, and nearly impossible to control. That is the first rule of invisible kings. Never chase attention, because attention loses value when it is hunted. Instead, cultivate a presence so composed, so restrained, and so emotionally disciplined that attention begins moving toward you on its own. Number 2. The graveyard of men who chased. There is a silent cemetery that stretches across the entire history of mankind. It has no monuments, no statues, no names carved into marble. Yet it is filled with billions of men who lived and died chasing things that were never meant to be caught that way. They chased respect and were humiliated. They chased love and were betrayed. They chased recognition and became servants to those who gave it. This graveyard is not made of bones. It is made of wasted lives, broken ambitions, and men who slowly lost their dignity trying to prove their worth to a world that never intended to reward them. Machiavelli saw this pattern clearly long before modern psychology explained it. The man who reveals his need becomes vulnerable to those who can withhold what he desires. Human nature has always been cruel in this regard. People sense desperation the way predators smell blood in water. The moment a man begins chasing validation, attention, or admiration, he unknowingly signals that he can be controlled. Every reaction becomes predictable. Every effort becomes visible. Every emotional response becomes a lever that others can pull whenever they wish. The tragedy is that most men believe chasing harder will eventually force the world to recognize them. They believe persistence alone will earn respect. But respect has never worked that way. Respect is not granted to the man who asks for it repeatedly. Respect is given, often unwillingly, to the man who appears completely unaffected by its absence. Look at the darkest chapters of history, and you will notice something disturbing. The men who held the greatest influence were rarely the ones pleading to be accepted. They were the ones who seemed almost detached from the need for approval. They spoke less. They revealed less. They reacted less. Their emotional restraint created a psychological pressure around them that others could feel but could not easily explain. Machiavelli described a version of this when he warned rulers that it is far safer to be feared than loved if one cannot be both. Love depends on the emotions of others, and emotions change quickly. Fear, respect, and controlled distance create something far more stable. This is the paradox most men fail to understand. The harder you chase something, the more power you give it over you. The moment you chase admiration, you become dependent on those who grant it. The moment you chase affection, you become vulnerable to those who can withdraw it. The moment you chase opportunity, you signal that you cannot survive without it. And once people sense that dependency, the balance of power quietly shifts away from you. They no longer see you as an equal. They see you as someone who needs something from them. And the person who needs something always loses leverage. The men buried in that invisible graveyard all made the same mistake. They confused effort with power. They believed showing their hunger would inspire admiration. They thought explaining their value would convince people to recognize it. Instead, every explanation reduced their mystery. Every emotional reaction made them easier to read. Every attempt to chase respect pushed it further away. Because the human mind values what appears scarce, controlled, and difficult to access. The moment something becomes available on demand, its psychological value begins to decline. The dangerous man understands this rule instinctively. He knows that attention is a currency, and he spends it carefully. He does not offer his presence everywhere. He does not react to every insult thrown in his direction. He does not attempt to win every argument or prove his intelligence in every conversation. Instead, he creates distance where others expect eagerness. He creates silence where others expect explanations. That silence begins to disturb people because they cannot easily interpret it. They search for emotional signals that never arrive. They test his patience, provoke his reactions, and study his behavior, hoping to find a weakness they can understand. But the man who has mastered detachment offers them nothing. His calm remains steady. His presence remains controlled. His actions are deliberate rather than reactive. And slowly, the people around him begin adjusting their behavior without even realizing it. They become more cautious in his presence. They speak more carefully. They begin seeking his attention rather than assuming they already have it. This transformation happens quietly, almost invisibly, but its effects are powerful. The man who once chased respect suddenly finds himself surrounded by it, not because he demanded it, but because he stopped needing it. This is the moment when the rules of the game reverse themselves. The same world that ignored him begins to watch him. The same people who overlooked him begin trying to understand him. The same opportunities that once felt distant begin appearing unexpectedly. Not because the world suddenly became fair, but because human psychology always gravitates toward controlled power. And controlled power is impossible to fake when a man has truly abandoned the instinct to chase. Most men will never reach this stage because the transition feels uncomfortable. It requires resisting the urge to explain yourself when misunderstood. It requires resisting the urge to react when provoked. It requires resisting the urge to chase what others seem to obtain easily. That restraint feels unnatural at first, like walking against the current of an entire culture built on attention and validation. But the men who endure that discomfort begin transforming into something rare. Number 3. The power of becoming unreachable. There is a moment in a man's psychological evolution when something inside him goes cold. Not cruel, not heartless, but cold in the way steel becomes cold after it has been forged in fire. This moment does not arrive through comfort or praise. It arrives after enough betrayal, enough rejection, enough moments where he realizes that the world does not reward sincerity the way he once believed it would. At that point, a quiet understanding begins forming in his mind. The problem was never his effort. The problem was his availability. The world does not chase what it can easily access. It does not respect what constantly seeks approval. And it does not value what remains permanently within reach. The moment a man understands this, he begins withdrawing something most people give away freely: his presence. Throughout history, distance has always been the silent armor of powerful men. Kings built walls, emperors surrounded themselves with guarded courts, and the most influential strategists rarely allowed their inner thoughts to be fully visible. Machiavelli observed this dynamic carefully. A ruler who exposes himself completely invites manipulation. The more predictable a leader becomes, the easier he is to control. But the man who remains partially hidden becomes something far more difficult to challenge. People cannot easily predict him, and what cannot be predicted begins to command caution. This principle does not belong only to kings and rulers. It governs everyday human interaction in ways most people never notice. When a man is constantly available, constantly responding, constantly explaining himself, he slowly erodes the weight of his own presence. His words become routine. His reactions become expected. His attention loses its psychological value because it can always be obtained with little effort. People grow accustomed to it, the same way they grow accustomed to background noise. But when that same man begins to withdraw his attention, something changes immediately. The silence he leaves behind becomes noticeable. The space he creates begins to carry weight. People start asking questions they never asked before. Why is he not responding the way he used to? Why does he seem distant? Why does he appear unaffected? Human psychology has an uncomfortable relationship with absence. When something disappears unexpectedly, curiosity begins filling the void. That curiosity slowly transforms into attention. Attention becomes fascination, and fascination eventually becomes a strange form of pursuit. This is why the most powerful shift a man can make is not becoming louder or more dominant. It is becoming unreachable in subtle, controlled ways. Not hostile, not arrogant, simply unavailable to manipulation. Unreachable men create a psychological tension that others instinctively try to resolve. Machiavelli understood that influence grows strongest when people must work to obtain access. A ruler who gives everyone equal closeness loses authority quickly. But a ruler who carefully controls who receives his attention begins shaping behavior without speaking a single command. The same principle applies to individual power. When a man stops reacting instantly, people begin choosing their words more carefully around him. When he stops explaining every decision, people begin studying his actions instead of questioning them. When he stops seeking approval, people begin offering it voluntarily, hoping to gain some form of recognition in return. But reaching this level of psychological control requires a transformation that most men resist. It requires abandoning the instinct to be liked by everyone. It requires accepting that some people will misinterpret your distance as arrogance or coldness. And in many cases, they will say so openly. They will accuse you of changing, of becoming detached, of acting differently than before. What they are really noticing is the loss of access they once took for granted. When a man becomes unreachable, he disrupts the comfort others built around his predictability. And human beings react strongly when their comfort disappears. The dangerous man does not rush to repair that discomfort. He does not explain his transformation or apologize for it. Instead, he remains calm inside the silence he has created. He understands that this phase is part of the shift from being accessible to being respected. Accessibility invites familiarity. Familiarity invites dismissal. But distance invites curiosity, and curiosity eventually invites respect. The same people who once overlooked him begin paying closer attention. The same voices that ignored him begin lowering their tone around him. The same environment that treated him as background noise begins recognizing the gravity of his presence. This is not manipulation. It is the natural response of human psychology to scarcity. The rarest thing in modern life is not intelligence, talent, or ambition. The rarest thing is emotional control. In a world where everyone reacts instantly, the man who remains calm becomes unsettling. In a world where everyone speaks constantly, the man who chooses silence becomes mysterious. In a world where everyone chases attention, the man who walks away from it becomes magnetic. But there is a darker truth hidden within this transformation. The moment you become unreachable, you will also become misunderstood. People who benefited from your constant availability will feel threatened by your distance. Some will attempt to provoke you into reacting again. Others will attempt to pull you back into the same patterns you abandoned. They may criticize you, question you, or attempt to guilt you into returning to your old behavior. These reactions are not random. They are attempts to restore the balance of control that once favored them. The man who has embraced his new position does not react to these pressures. He observes them quietly. He understands that every attempt to provoke him is evidence that his detachment is working. The less he reacts, the more others must adjust their behavior around him. Over time, something subtle begins happening. The world slowly reorganizes itself in response to his presence. Conversations shift. Dynamics change. People who once ignored him begin watching him carefully, trying to understand the source of his quiet authority. This is the power of becoming unreachable. Not isolation, not arrogance, but controlled distance. The ability to choose when your presence is given and when it is withheld. The ability to remain emotionally stable while others reveal their impatience. The ability to walk through the world without needing constant recognition from it. Before we move deeper, I want you to write something in the comments as a reminder of this principle. Write, "My presence is rare." Because the moment a man truly treats his presence as something valuable, the world begins to treat it that way as well. Number 4. The silence that breaks men. There is a kind of silence that most men cannot survive. It is not the peaceful silence of rest or the quiet of a calm evening. It is a colder silence, the kind that appears when a man stops performing for the world and begins observing it instead. This silence exposes truths people spend their entire lives trying to avoid. It reveals how much of human behavior is driven by attention, validation, and emotional reaction. It reveals how quickly respect disappears when a man begins chasing it. And it reveals something even darker. Most people are uncomfortable around a man who cannot be provoked. Human beings are deeply conditioned to expect reactions. They expect approval when they speak. They expect disagreement when they challenge someone. They expect emotional responses when they provoke, insult, or criticize. These reactions form the invisible rhythm of social life. People exchange energy through approval, anger, laughter, and argument. The entire system depends on predictable responses. But when a man refuses to participate in that exchange, the rhythm breaks. His silence disrupts the pattern others rely on to understand their position around him. Machiavelli understood that silence could be more powerful than speech. A ruler who speaks too often reveals too much of his mind. The more people hear his thoughts, the easier it becomes to predict him. But a ruler who speaks rarely forces others to interpret his intentions from limited information. This uncertainty creates caution, and caution, when sustained long enough, slowly evolves into respect. The same principle governs the behavior of powerful individuals throughout history. The most dangerous men were not those constantly declaring their strength. They were the ones who allowed others to wonder about it. In the modern world, silence has become even more unsettling because constant noise has become the norm. Everyone reacts instantly. Everyone broadcasts their opinions. Everyone seeks attention through words, emotions, and reactions. In this environment, the man who remains silent becomes difficult to categorize. People search for signals from him, but find none. They attempt to provoke him, but receive nothing in return. And when their attempts fail, something strange begins to happen inside their minds. They begin projecting meaning into the silence itself. Some assume he is calculating. Others assume he is dangerous. Some believe he is judging them quietly. The truth may be far simpler. He has simply learned the value of control. But human psychology rarely accepts simple explanations when faced with uncertainty. People fill silence with their own fears, assumptions, and interpretations. This is why silence can break men who depend on emotional reactions from others. When they encounter someone who refuses to react, they feel an invisible pressure they cannot easily release. This pressure reveals the hidden weakness behind constant communication. Many men speak not because they have something important to say, but because they fear being ignored. They react not because the situation demands it, but because silence makes them feel invisible. When they encounter someone who remains calm, patient, and emotionally unmoved, it forces them to confront their own need for attention. That confrontation is uncomfortable, and discomfort often turns into hostility. The silent man becomes a mirror reflecting the insecurities of those around him. Machiavelli hinted at this dynamic when he described how rulers should manage their public image carefully while keeping their true intentions concealed. A leader who reveals every thought becomes transparent, and transparency invites manipulation. But a leader who reveals only fragments forces others to remain cautious. This controlled silence does not come from fear or weakness. It comes from discipline. The discipline to observe rather than react. The discipline to think before speaking. And the discipline to let others expose themselves through their impatience. In every environment, the man who masters silence gains a subtle advantage. During conflict, others reveal their emotions while he reveals nothing. During negotiations, others rush to fill the quiet while he studies their words carefully. During confrontation, others become louder while he becomes calmer. This imbalance shifts psychological control in ways most people never recognize consciously. They simply feel that something about him is different, something that cannot easily be challenged or manipulated. But reaching this level of composure requires confronting something darker than silence itself. It requires confronting loneliness. When a man stops reacting to everything around him, some people drift away. They lose interest in someone who no longer provides constant emotional exchange. Conversations become shorter. Interactions become more deliberate. The noise of superficial attention fades. What remains is a quieter world where fewer voices exist, but the ones that remain carry more weight. Most men retreat before reaching this stage because loneliness feels like failure to them. They rush back to noise, back to reactions, back to chasing the approval of those who never truly respected them. But the man who endures that silence discovers something powerful hidden within it. He discovers clarity. Without constant emotional noise, he begins seeing people more clearly. He recognizes manipulation faster. He notices patterns of behavior others ignore. And slowly, his silence transforms from isolation into control. The world does not immediately reward this transformation. In fact, it often resists it. But over time, the calm presence of a silent man begins influencing the environment around him. Conversations slow down. Reactions soften. People become more careful with their words. They cannot easily explain why, but they sense that careless behavior around him feels inappropriate. That subtle shift is the beginning of quiet authority. Before we continue deeper into this path, write something in the comments that very few people will truly understand. Write, "My silence is my weapon." Because once a man truly understands how to remain calm while the world demands reactions from him, he stops being another voice in the noise. He becomes something far rarer, a man whose silence carries more weight than the words of everyone around him. Number 5. The death of your old self. Every transformation that creates power begins with a quiet death. Not a physical death, but the slow and brutal burial of the person you used to be. The man who chased approval. The man who needed recognition. The man who felt uneasy when ignored. That version of you cannot survive the path you are walking now. He must disappear. And unlike the dramatic stories people tell about self-improvement, this death does not feel heroic. It feels lonely. It feels uncomfortable. It feels like watching parts of your identity fall apart in silence while the world continues moving without noticing. Most men never allow this death to happen. They sense it beginning and panic. They rush back to the habits that once gave them comfort. They return to chasing validation, seeking attention, explaining themselves, proving their worth to people who never intended to respect them. The old self survives because it is familiar, and familiarity is one of the strongest chains binding human behavior. Machiavelli understood that transformation requires abandoning the expectations of others. A ruler who tries to maintain the approval of everyone becomes trapped by it. The moment a man tries to preserve his old image, he loses the freedom to become something stronger. The death of your old self begins with a disturbing realization. Much of what you once believed about respect was an illusion. You believed that effort would be rewarded, that loyalty would be recognized, that honesty would naturally earn admiration. But the world does not operate on those simple equations. Human behavior is far more complex and far colder. People often admire strength more than sincerity. They respect control more than emotion. They follow those who appear composed, even when they do not fully understand them. When this realization settles into your mind, it shatters the expectations that once guided your actions. This is the stage where many men feel anger. They feel betrayed by the rules they were taught. They see others gaining influence through detachment, while their own sincerity left them overlooked. That anger can become dangerous if it is not controlled. Some men allow it to consume them, turning bitterness into their identity. But the dangerous man channels that anger into discipline. He does not allow resentment to rule him. Instead, he allows the illusion of the old world to collapse quietly while he builds a new mindset in its place. The first part of that mindset is emotional sovereignty. The man you are becoming no longer depends on the reactions of others to define his state of mind. Praise does not inflate him. Criticism does not destabilize him. Rejection does not humiliate him. He understands that other people's opinions often reflect their own insecurities, ambitions, and fears. When a man internalizes this truth, something inside him becomes immovable. The emotional hooks that once controlled him lose their power. The second part of this transformation is restraint. The old version of you wanted to respond immediately. He wanted to defend himself against every accusation, correct every misunderstanding, and prove his intelligence in every conversation. But the man emerging from this transformation no longer feels that need. He understands that explaining himself to the wrong audience weakens his position. He chooses carefully when to speak and when to remain silent. And that restraint slowly builds an invisible authority around him. Over time, something remarkable begins to happen. The world reorganizes itself around the man who has buried his old identity. The people who remain in his life treat him differently. Conversations become more respectful. Interactions become more measured. Opportunities appear in places he once struggled to access, not because he demanded them, but because his presence now carries a different psychological weight. The man who once chased validation becomes the man whose attention others seek. This is why the death of the old self is necessary. The version of you who once ran after recognition cannot become the man who attracts it. That transformation requires discipline, patience, and a willingness to endure misunderstanding while your identity rebuilds itself from the inside. It is not a comfortable process, but it is the only path that leads away from the endless chase most men remain trapped within. Number 6. The hidden law of human gravity. There is a law operating beneath human behavior that few people ever recognize. It is not written in books of morality, and it is rarely spoken about openly. Yet it quietly governs attraction, influence, and power in almost every interaction between human beings. It is the law of psychological gravity. And the cruel truth behind this law is simple. People are drawn toward what does not need them. The more a man appears dependent on attention, affection, or approval, the lighter he becomes in the social universe. But the moment he withdraws that dependency, something shifts. His presence becomes heavier. His words begin to carry weight. His absence begins to disturb people more than his presence ever did. Machiavelli understood this dynamic centuries before modern psychology gave it a name. A ruler who constantly seeks loyalty invites betrayal. A leader who begs for admiration teaches people that admiration is optional. But the ruler who appears self-contained, unmoved by praise or criticism, creates a different emotional response. People begin to orbit around him, not because he commands them directly, but because his composure suggests a form of power they cannot easily measure. Gravity works the same way in human interaction. What stands firm begins to pull others toward it. Most men spend their lives unknowingly weakening their own gravity. They reveal too much of their emotional state. They chase attention the moment they feel ignored. They react instantly to provocation, criticism, or rejection. Each reaction becomes a signal that their internal stability depends on external validation. And human beings instinctively test anything that reveals weakness. When people realize that your emotions can be manipulated through approval or disapproval, they begin using those tools to control your behavior. The man who needs recognition will always chase it. The man who needs affection will always negotiate for it. And the man who needs acceptance will always adapt himself to those who provide it. But the man who has learned to detach from these needs becomes something far more difficult to influence. His emotional state remains stable regardless of how others behave around him. Praise does not excite him excessively. Criticism does not disturb him deeply. Rejection does not push him into desperation. This stability sends a signal that many people cannot consciously explain, but immediately feel. It suggests that his identity does not depend on the opinions surrounding him. And that independence begins creating gravity. Human psychology responds strongly to this type of presence because it contradicts the patterns people expect. Most interactions follow predictable rules. Approval is rewarded, disapproval is resisted, and emotional reactions maintain the rhythm of social exchange. But when someone refuses to play by those rules, the system begins to destabilize. People attempt to regain balance by understanding the source of his composure. They watch his behavior more carefully. They study his reactions. They become curious about what gives him such control. Curiosity is one of the most powerful forces in human interaction. It drives attention. It fuels fascination. And when sustained long enough, it turns into respect. The man who possesses psychological gravity does not demand respect directly. He creates the conditions that allow it to emerge naturally. His discipline becomes visible through his restraint. His confidence becomes visible through his calmness. His influence grows not through noise, but through the quiet stability of his presence. Many men retreat from this stage because the silence of self-direction feels intimidating. It requires responsibility for your own identity. It requires trusting your judgment even when others question it. But the man who endures this phase begins developing a form of confidence that cannot easily be shaken. It is not the loud confidence of someone trying to impress others. It is the quiet confidence of someone who no longer needs to. Over time, the effects become visible in subtle ways. Conversations begin shifting toward you without your effort. People become more attentive when you speak. Your absence becomes noticeable in environments where you once blended into the background. This is psychological gravity at work. The less you chase attention, the more attention begins moving toward you. Not because you demanded it, but because stability attracts curiosity, and curiosity attracts influence. But remember something important. Gravity must be maintained through discipline. The moment you return to chasing validation, the weight of your presence begins to fade. Emotional independence requires constant awareness of your reactions, your motivations, and the subtle ways attention can become addictive again. The man who masters this awareness remains centered even while the world around him moves unpredictably. Number 7. The cold art of walking away. There is a moment in every man's life when he must learn a skill that history's most powerful figures mastered long ago. It is not the skill of persuasion, nor dominance, nor intelligence. It is something far colder and far more dangerous. It is the ability to walk away without hesitation. Most men believe power comes from holding on to opportunities, to relationships, to recognition, to approval. They cling tightly to anything that appears valuable, afraid that if they release it, they may never receive it again. But the truth hidden beneath centuries of human behavior is the opposite. The man who cannot walk away is the man who can be controlled. Machiavelli understood this principle with ruthless clarity. A ruler who becomes dependent on allies eventually becomes their prisoner. A leader who fears losing loyalty will tolerate disrespect in order to keep it. The moment a man believes he cannot afford to lose something, he has already surrendered power over it. Human beings sense this dependency quickly. They may not consciously recognize it, but they feel it in subtle ways. The person who is afraid to lose a position becomes easier to manipulate. The person who is afraid to lose a relationship becomes easier to dominate. The person who is afraid to lose approval becomes easier to control. The coldest form of strength emerges when a man removes that fear entirely. When he accepts that walking away is always an option, his posture changes. His voice changes. His decisions become calmer and more deliberate. He no longer negotiates from desperation. He no longer tolerates disrespect simply to maintain access. And most importantly, he no longer chases what should come naturally. Walking away is not an act of anger. It is an act of clarity. It is the moment when a man recognizes that his dignity holds more value than whatever he might lose. History offers endless examples of this principle in action. The figures who shaped events most decisively were often the ones prepared to abandon alliances, positions, or comforts when those things no longer served their strategy. Their strength came not from holding on to every advantage, but from knowing when to let go. Walking away requires discipline because the human mind naturally fears loss. It fears uncertainty. It fears the possibility that what you leave behind may never return. But the dangerous man understands that power rarely belongs to those who cling. It belongs to those who choose. The moment you internalize this truth, your entire relationship with the world begins to change. You stop negotiating with your self-respect. You stop chasing environments where you are undervalued. You stop explaining yourself to people who have already decided not to understand. Instead, you observe carefully and move deliberately. If something aligns with your standards, you engage with it. If it does not, you walk away without anger and without explanation. This calm detachment sends a signal stronger than any argument could ever deliver. But walking away also carries a hidden challenge. Each time you do it, you confront the fear that once kept you chasing. You face the possibility of losing what others desperately try to keep. And with each step you take away from something that diminishes you, that fear weakens. Eventually, it disappears entirely. What remains is a man who cannot be cornered by emotional pressure or manipulated by the threat of loss. Right. I can walk away. Let it become a quiet rule guiding your actions. Because the moment a man truly understands that nothing in this world is worth sacrificing his self-respect, he becomes far more difficult to control than anyone who still believes he must hold on at all costs. Number 8. The day the world begins hunting you. There comes a moment in a man's transformation when the balance of the world around him begins to shift in ways that are almost invisible at first. Nothing dramatic happens overnight. No announcement is made. No applause follows him. But the energy of his interactions begins to change. The same world that once ignored him begins paying attention. The same people who once overlooked him begin watching more closely. And the opportunities he once chased start appearing without the desperate pursuit that once defined his life. This moment is not magic. It is the quiet result of a psychological law few people ever master. The world hunts what refuses to chase it. For most of your life, you were taught to pursue everything aggressively. Pursue recognition. Pursue acceptance. Pursue relationships. Pursue opportunities as if the world were a race, and every man must sprint to secure his place before someone else takes it. That belief has created generations of men, constantly exhausting themselves in pursuit of attention that disappears the moment they stop running. But the moment you stepped away from that endless chase, something deeper began happening inside your behavior. Your energy changed. Your posture changed. The desperation that once lived behind your actions slowly died. And people around you felt that change long before they understood it. Human beings are extraordinarily sensitive to emotional signals. Even when they cannot explain what they feel, they notice the difference between a man who needs something from them and a man who does not. The first type invites negotiation. The second type creates curiosity. When a man stops chasing approval, others begin wondering why he does not seek it. When a man stops chasing validation, others begin questioning what gives him such calm. And when a man stops chasing attention, attention begins following him instead. Curiosity pulls people towards stability, the same way gravity pulls objects toward mass. At first, the change appears in subtle ways. People begin listening more carefully when you speak. Conversations slow down slightly when you enter the room. The same individuals who once dismissed you begin asking questions about your perspective. They may not even realize why their behavior has changed. But human psychology naturally respects emotional independence because it is rare. In a world where most people constantly seek validation, the person who appears unaffected by it becomes fascinating. But the darker truth behind this transformation is that not everyone will welcome it. Some people will feel unsettled by the shift. They were comfortable when you were chasing their approval because it gave them control. Your attention was predictable. Your reactions were easy to trigger. Now that predictability has vanished. They cannot easily influence your mood or your decisions anymore. This loss of control may cause them to question you, criticize you, or attempt to provoke the old reactions they once relied on. The dangerous man does not respond to these tests with anger or explanation. He understands that every attempt to provoke him is evidence that his transformation is working. When someone loses the ability to control your behavior through approval or rejection, they often try to restore that control through emotional pressure. But the man who has truly stopped chasing remains unmoved by these tactics. He watches them quietly and continues walking his path without interruption. Over time, the world adapts to this new version of you. The same individuals who once tested your patience begin treating you more carefully. Opportunities appear because people recognize the stability behind your actions. Your presence begins attracting conversations, alliances, and possibilities that once seemed distant. This is the quiet moment when the law reverses itself. The world that once forced you to chase it begins moving toward you instead. Right, the world comes to me, not as a boast, but as a reminder of the discipline you have built. Because the moment a man truly stops chasing what the world offers, he begins discovering how many things were waiting to approach him all along. Number 9. The throne of the untouchable man. At the end of this transformation, there is a place few men ever reach. It is not a throne made of gold, and it is not a position granted by the approval of the crowd. It is something far colder and far more powerful. It is the psychological throne of the untouchable man. The man who sits there does not demand respect. He does not chase loyalty. He does not beg for recognition. He simply exists with a level of internal control that makes manipulation nearly impossible. And in a world built on emotional reactions and desperate pursuit, that level of control appears almost threatening to those who encounter it. The untouchable man is not immune to hardship. He still experiences loss, betrayal, and disappointment. But the difference lies in how those experiences affect him. They do not break his composure. They do not send him running after validation. They do not push him back into the patterns of chasing that once defined his life. Instead, he absorbs these events with the calm understanding that the world has always been unpredictable. Machiavelli observed that rulers who survived the chaos of politics were not the ones who hoped for fairness. They were the ones who accepted the brutal nature of power and prepared themselves accordingly. This mindset separates the untouchable man from the crowd. Most people move through life reacting to every emotional shift around them. Praise lifts them. Criticism crushes them. Approval energizes them. Rejection destabilizes them. Their inner world rises and falls depending on the behavior of others. But the man who has mastered detachment no longer lives on that unstable ground. His identity does not fluctuate with every opinion thrown in his direction. He does not measure his worth through the approval of those around him. And because of that, he cannot easily be controlled. Control in human interaction often operates through emotional leverage. If someone can provoke your anger, they influence your behavior. If someone can manipulate your need for approval, they influence your decisions. If someone can threaten the things you are afraid to lose, they gain power over you. The untouchable man removes these levers one by one. His anger becomes disciplined rather than explosive. His need for approval disappears entirely. And his fear of loss fades because he understands that anything in this world can vanish without warning. This does not make him cold in the sense of cruelty. It makes him clear. Clear about what he values, clear about what he will tolerate, and clear about when to walk away. That clarity creates boundaries stronger than any argument. People quickly realize that manipulation does not work on him. Emotional pressure does not work on him. Attempts to provoke him into chasing do not work on him. And when these tactics fail repeatedly, something unusual happens. The same individuals who once tried to influence him begin respecting the stability they cannot break. Respect earned through emotional control is different from respect earned through dominance. Dominance can be challenged, authority can be questioned. But emotional stability creates a presence that feels difficult to disturb. People sense that the untouchable man is not seeking power over them. He simply refuses to surrender power over himself. That distinction changes how others interact with him. They become more deliberate with their words. They think more carefully before testing his patience. They recognize that his calm is not weakness, but discipline. Reaching this stage requires patience, because the world does not immediately reward this level of control. In fact, it may resist it at first. Some people will attempt to provoke you simply to see if the old version of you still exists beneath the surface. Others will attempt to guilt you into returning to the familiar patterns of chasing and reacting. But the man who has reached this throne remains steady through these tests. He understands that consistency is the final proof of transformation. And over time, the world begins adjusting to that consistency. The noise around him fades. The people who cannot respect his boundaries drift away.